So syntax is the study of sentence structure. What we want to be able to do by the end of this section is take a look at declarative English sentences and be able to diagram how they are formed into different word categories and phrases. So for example, this structure may be a little bit scary at first for the small dog quickly ran to the store, but we're going to learn how to label each individual word category and then how we can build them up into phrases in order to form a complete sentence. So to do that, we should probably understand what a sentence is, and we'll take a look at the smallest possible sentence that we can have, which is a sentence that has at least a subject and a predicate. So the subject is simply who or what the sentence is about. You can usually identify subjects in sentences by replacing them with a pronoun like he, she, they, or it. And predicates are what the subject does, feels, or what it is. So we have three example sentences here. The first one is Fido sleeps. Now, Fido is the subject and sleeps is the predicate in the sentence. We basically need two words to make a sentence in English. So Fido is the subject here. We can replace it with a word like he. The old man with the suitcase left to Africa last week. In this example, the old man with the suitcase is our subject. Again, we can replace this whole thing with the word he, and then we get the phrase or sentence, he left to Africa last week. So left to Africa last week is the predicate. It's telling us what the subject is doing. In the third one, a cold, frigid old book lay tattered on the ground. We can replace this whole subject here with the word like it. It lay tattered on the ground, and lay tattered on the ground is the predicate that's describing what the cold, frigid old book is doing. So what this means is that if we want to create a sentence, we at the very least can split it up into subject and predicate. These are separate things, and we'll keep them separate in our tree structures. So let's practice identifying them. So we'll underline the subject, and then whatever's left is the predicate. So Jenna's dog had an accident. I'm going to say Jenna's dog is the subject here because we can replace it with the word it. It had an accident. That means that had an accident and everything else is the predicate. The bunny rabbit that is eating grass left me. Now, we may think that the bunny rabbit is the subject here, but if we write it here, it that is eating grass left me. That sounds a little weird. That's not quite right. Instead, it is the whole thing, the bunny rabbit that is eating grass left me. So we could say it left me, and that would be fine. So the object that we're thinking about, the subject that we're thinking about in the real world is a bunny rabbit who is eating grass. And for the third case, one of the only people in the world that I know is coming to meet me. So who or what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about one of the only people in the world that I know. And we could replace it with he. So he is coming to meet me, and that would be fine. So whatever's left in this case is coming to meet me is the predicate. So we don't want to be looking for just like a verb to figure out where the subject and predicate boundary is. We want to be using a test like the it replacement or he, she, they replacement in order to make sure that the sentence is grammatical and that we've replaced the entire subject. So we should also talk about some grammaticality judgments, because what does it mean for a sentence to be grammatical? Well, in general, a sentence is just grammatical if a first language speaker of that language accepts it as a possible sentence. So, for example, I don't want to believe that Frodo was stealing my magazines. That's perfectly grammatical to me. It sounds fine. The one which the with scooter ran the park towards, this is not okay at all. This is ungrammatical. The one which is fine, but then putting the afterword is a little weird. We can't do that. With scooter, we're missing an article like or the. Ran the park towards, really towards should be before the park in this case. So this just doesn't work for me. And in some dialects, the third sentence would be considered grammatical. So I ain't wanting none of them people near me, you hear? So some people do talk like this. So in like a standard Canadian or American dialect, you might not expect it to be grammatical, but there are some speakers out there who talk like this, and we'd say it's grammatical for those speakers. Now, let's talk about word categories. So there's a couple different type of syntactic categories or word categories that we can look at. The first one are lexical categories, And these are just content words in a sentence. So these are nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and prepositions. And then we have non-lexical ones. So these are functional words. They're not content words. They're usually introduced for grammatical purposes. So when we learn these, we're going to be focusing on lexical categories first, and these can be determined by their meaning, inflection, and distribution. When we talk about nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and prepositions, we're not simply just talking about their meaning, because some words can have the same word appear as multiple different categories depending on the context. So if we just think about context, then we can start thinking about the different possibilities of these words. So for example, in the sentence, wrong rarely prospers, wrong is acting as a noun here. It's a subject. But in the second sentence, you wrong me and I'll sue you, it's acting as a verb. It's making a connection between you and me. In the case of that tourist took the wrong road, well, wrong is describing the road. It's an adjective in this case. And when you say Edward often spells words wrong, you're describing how the spelling happens. Well, it spells incorrectly. So just because we have a single word doesn't mean that it has a specific category. We need to care about context in addition to meaning. So for nouns, these are the most straightforward ones in terms of meaning. They're people, places, things, and they also have abstract qualities like happiness or idea. Generally, if you want to find a noun, you can add a plural form or possessive form to it. So in the case of kid, we can make it kids, idea, ideas. In the case of Jane, saying multiple Janes might be weird, but we can add that possessive apostrophe. Same with proper names like El Salvador, El Salvador's government, or something like that. In terms of its distribution, it usually occurs after determiners, so words like the, many, or some, or even after adjectives. So in the case of the man and some students, these are examples of determiners, and they occur before the noun. And in the case of a small workbook, small, the adjective is describing the noun. Nouns typically come after when adjectives used attributively, like in that case. Now, adjectives are properties or attributes of nouns. So what adjectives do is they describe nouns. So quick, green, frothy, wooden, fastest, greener, richer, poorest. These are all examples of words that describe nouns. And usually what we can do with these words is we can add a comparative suffix like or even another word like more. So we could do, for example, quicker, or we could do more quick. That might sound a little bit weird to some people, but it's perfectly fine to me. Or we can do a superlative form. So we could do quicker, quickest, more quick, or even most quick. Now, typically where it occurs is usually right before nouns, but sometimes it occurs after linking verbs like is, or feels, or seems. So for example, in cute puppy, cute is occurring before puppy, it's describing it. But in the case of Jane is sad, or the cute boy is smart, this is kind of like an equals relationship. So cute is describing boy, but so is smart in this case. So these are adjectives in both of those positions. The ones where adjectives occur before nouns are called attributive adjectives, and the ones where adjectives appear after a linking verb or is are considered predicative adjectives. So if you ever hear those two terms, that is what those mean. Now, verbs, we typically think of them as action words, but they can be sensations or states as well. So run, toss, jump, and allow, these are usually like pretty common action words, but things like is another example of a verb, or feels, where you're feeling an internal feeling and not actually touching something. So verbs have several different forms. They have a past tense form, a past participle form, a present participle form, and a third person form. What I mean by this is we can think of run. We have the past tense ran. We have the past participle had run. I'll put commas in there. We have the present participle is running. And we have the third person singular runs. So whenever you have a verb, you can make these 5 different forms, including the base form there. And that will tell us that you have a verb. If you take something like, what's something that definitely cannot be a verb? Like happiness, for example. Happiness is a noun, but we don't have a past tense of happiness. We can't say had happiness or is happinessing or happinesses. We don't have those forms in English. And in terms of their distribution, they normally start the predicate after the subject, although you can have adverbs or helping verbs called auxiliaries or modals before that. And these are usually somewhere around adverbs. So its strict distribution is a little bit hard to pinpoint, but it's usually the head word in a predicate. It's like the most important idea in the predicate. So he left. Left is our predicate. That's going to be our verb. They quickly ran. Here we have quickly. It's an adverb modifying ran, but ran is the main action there. And for Martha ate slowly, we see another case where the adverb is coming after this time. Now, adverbs are words that modify verbs or they modify entire sentences. We can think of the distinction between adjectives and adverbs as being adjectives describe nouns and adverbs can describe everything else. So some of these have comparative and superlative forms like quickest, slower, quieter, harder, hardest, quietest, and so on, depending on their use. But most of the the adverbs that we have in English end in an ly. We do have some cases like tomorrow or words like here and there that are adverbs that don't quite follow that pattern. But in general, if you want to determine whether something is an adverb, you want to check the movement test. So adverbs can appear immediately before or after a verb, but they can also be moved around to the beginning or end of a sentence. So you can say quickly they ran or they quickly ran. Either position is fine and it describes the action of running or the whole sentence of them running. In the case of Martha ate slowly, we can put it after the verb, but we could say slowly Martha ate, and that would be fine as well. So we could move it to the beginning. And that's going to be your best trick in order to determine what an adverb is. Now, the last one is prepositions. Prepositions cannot be inflected, so we don't have to worry about different forms of prepositions, and their meanings are a little bit confusing. I say confusing because there are so many different possible meanings for prepositions that it's not really helpful to use meaning as a diagnostic tool. It's often better to use distribution, and that is that prepositions always introduce noun phrases. We'll learn what noun phrases are a little bit later in more detail, but think about it as a noun with all of its descriptive words or modifiers. So up the road, up is introducing a noun phrase. Near Ben, near is introducing a noun phrase. At 5 a.m., 5 a.m. is a noun phrase. And we have some other examples for 9 months with binoculars like B. Diddy next to him. In each of these cases, sometimes it is best to just understand some general prepositions and how they work and use those as baselines when comparing other ones. So prepositions can be substituted with a limited amount of other prepositions depending on the context. So if I have something like road and I see a word like beside and I'm like, is beside a preposition? I don't know. Well, I could use another preposition to see if it fits. Well, up the road. If I know that up is a preposition and beside is kind of doing the same thing, it's talking about a location and it's introducing that noun phrase, then I can say, okay, this is probably a preposition too. So let's try determining the categories of the underlined words below. So each time my dog runs away from me, I quietly threaten him with destroying a small box of his 2 favorite snacks. Okay, so time is a noun. Each time, each is what's called a determiner, and it's introducing the noun time. Dog is a noun in this case. Runs away. Runs is the action, it's the verb here. Away is describing the direction that we're running, so this is an adverb. And what from is doing is from is introducing a noun phrase me, or just a noun in this case, specifically a pronoun. So this is a preposition, and this from is like always going to behave as a preposition. I quietly threaten. So quietly is describing how the threatening is happening. So threaten is a verb and quietly is an adverb there. Him with destroying a small box of his 2 favorite snacks. So with is a preposition. You're doing it with something. And then small box. Box is a noun. Small is describing that noun. So this is going to be an adjective. And then for favorite snacks, snacks is another noun, it's a thing in the world, and favorite is describing those snacks. So favorite is an adjective.